My parents said it like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. If your sister isn't invited, we're not coming. No yelling, no hesitation. Just a clean, final sentence like a door shutting in my face. That was the moment I realized this was never just about my wedding. It was about a lifetime of choices. Every time they picked her, every time they told me to be understanding, to keep the peace, to remember that family comes first as long as I came last. My name is Sofia, and for years, I convinced myself I could live with being second. I built my life quietly, carefully, hoping that if I didn't ask for much, I wouldn't lose everything. I was wrong. Because when my parents chose my sister one more time, they didn't just skip a wedding. They lost every child they'd spent years ignoring for her, and they didn't even see it happening. I don't remember a time when my sister Emily wasn't the center of our family. Some kids grow up believing the world revolves around the sun. I grew up believing it revolved around her. Emily was 3 years older than me, confident, charming, and effortlessly good at everything that seemed to matter to my parents. School awards, sports, social events. If she walked into a room, the air shifted. Conversations followed her, praise followed her, excuses followed her too. I learned early that there were two versions of rules in our house. If Emily forgot her homework, she was overwhelmed. If I did, I was careless. If Emily raised her voice, she was expressing herself. If I did, I was being difficult. Whenever I questioned it, my mom would smile tightly and say, "You know how your sister is." As if that explained everything. As if her personality was a law of nature the rest of us had to adapt to. My dad preferred silence. He wasn't cruel, not openly. He just looked the other way. And somehow, that hurt more. I became the quiet one, the agreeable one, the daughter who didn't cause problems. I told myself it was maturity, that I was being understanding, that one day, they'd notice how easy I made things for them. But the truth was simpler and uglier. I was learning how to disappear. Family dinners revolved around Emily's stories, her plans, her feelings. If I spoke too long, someone would interrupt. If I stayed quiet, no one noticed. Either way, the message was the same: my presence was optional. Once, when I was 12, I tried to explain to my mom that something Emily had said really hurt me. She didn't even ask what it was. She just sighed and said, "Sofia, don't be so sensitive." She didn't mean it. That sentence followed me for years. She didn't mean it. She never means it. And somehow I always felt it. By the time I reached high school, I stopped expecting fairness. I focused on my grades, my part-time job, my small circle of friends. I built a world that didn't rely on my family's approval, because deep down, I knew that approval came at a price: silence, sacrifice, and always stepping aside when Emily needed the spotlight. What I didn't know yet was that this pattern wasn't temporary. It wasn't a phase. It was training. Training me to accept less, training them to expect it. And one day, that lesson would come back in the most public, painful way possible on a day that was supposed to be about me. For a long time, I believed that growing up would change everything. Adults, I thought, were supposed to gain perspective. Distance was supposed to heal old wounds. And when I left Indiana for college in Ohio, I convinced myself that space would soften my parents' favoritism, that time would make them see me clearly separate from my sister, separate from the role I'd been assigned since childhood. I was wrong. If anything, leaving home made the pattern impossible to ignore. Emily stayed close. She enrolled at a local college, dropped out, enrolled again, changed majors twice, then quit entirely. She moved back home more times than I could count. Every setback in her life became a family crisis. My parents rearranged their schedules for her. They paid her bills. They defended her choices with a loyalty that never wavered. "She's still figuring herself out," my mom would say. Meanwhile, I figured myself out alone. I worked 2 jobs to pay rent. I balanced classes, deadlines, and exhaustion. When I was sick, I still went to work. When I was overwhelmed, I learned to swallow it. Independence wasn't something I chose, it was something I was expected to perform flawlessly. Whenever I called home, the conversations followed a familiar script. "How's Emily doing? Did Emily decide about that job yet? You should check in on your sister." Once, after a brutal week of midterms, I told my mom I was barely sleeping. She paused, then said, "Well, you've always been strong, Sofia. That's why we don't worry about you. I hung up and cried in my car, realizing that strength in my family was just another word for neglect. Holidays made everything worse. At Thanksgiving, Emily spoke loudly, interrupted freely, and rewrote family history with confidence. If I corrected even the smallest detail, my dad would raise his voice slightly and say, "Sophia, don't turn this into an argument." At Christmas, Emily mocked my serious personality in front of everyone. When I asked her to stop, she rolled her eyes and said, "Relax, it's a joke." No one defended me, not once. Later, when I finally told my mom how deeply it hurt, she sighed like I was exhausting her. "You're too sensitive," she said. "You know your sister doesn't think before she speaks." That was when it hit me. They weren't unaware. They weren't confused. They had simply decided whose feelings mattered more. So I pulled back. I visited less. I stopped sharing personal details. I learned how to love my family in small, controlled doses, just enough to avoid confrontation, not enough to get hurt. Then, I met Daniel. He noticed things I'd spent years normalizing. "Why does your sister get unlimited chances?" he asked one night. "While you're expected to be perfect?" I opened my mouth to defend them and realized I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't invisible. I was being ignored. And soon, that silence I'd perfected would no longer be enough. Daniel proposed on a quiet Sunday afternoon. No crowd, no announcement. Just the two of us sitting on the floor of our apartment, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and cold coffee. When he asked me, my first thought wasn't excitement, it was fear. Not of marriage. Of my family. As soon as the ring was on my finger, a familiar knot formed in my chest. I knew exactly what would happen next. The questions. The expectations. The unspoken rule that Emily would somehow become the center of this moment too. When I told my parents, my mom screamed with joy. My dad congratulated me in his steady, reserved way. Then came the pause. "And your sister?" my mom asked. "Have you told Emily yet?" Not, "We're happy for you." Not, "How are you feeling?" Just Emily. I told them Daniel and I were planning something small. Intimate. A guest list based on people who had supported us consistently, kindly, without conditions. There was silence on the other end of the line. My mom cleared her throat. "Well, of course your sister would be invited." It wasn't a question. That night, Daniel and I sat at the kitchen table, papers spread out between us. The guest list felt less like planning a wedding and more like navigating a minefield. "Do you actually want her there?" he asked gently. I thought about Emily's jokes, her interruptions, the way she commanded attention without apology. I imagined her at the ceremony rolling her eyes, whispering comments, finding a way to remind everyone she was still the most important person in the room. "No," I said quietly. "I want one day that isn't about her." Saying it out loud felt dangerous, like breaking a rule I'd never been allowed to question. When I called my parents a week later, my hands were shaking. "We've finalized the guest list," I said. "Emily won't be invited." The silence this time was heavy. My mom spoke first. "Sophia, you can't be serious." "I am," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "This isn't about punishing her, it's about protecting myself." "That's incredibly hurtful," she replied. "She's your sister." "I know," I said. "And I'm your daughter." My dad finally spoke. "You're creating unnecessary drama." I almost laughed. For years, I had absorbed the drama quietly. Now that I refused to carry it, suddenly I was the problem. A few hours later, my mom called back. "If your sister isn't invited," she said slowly, "we're not coming." There it was. The sentence that confirmed everything I had spent a lifetime suspecting. I thanked her for being honest. I hung up. And for the first time in my life, I didn't call back to apologize. But I didn't yet understand what that decision would cost them, or how many truths it would force into the open. I didn't announce my decision publicly. I didn't post about it. I didn't explain myself on social media. I simply moved forward with my wedding plans quietly, carefully like I had learned to do with everything else in my life. But my parents made sure everyone knew. Within days, my phone stopped feeling like a personal device and started feeling like evidence in a trial I never agreed to attend. My Aunt Linda called first. "I hope you realize what you're doing," she said, skipping any form of greeting. "Your mother hasn't slept in 2 nights." I closed my eyes. "I'm sorry she's upset." "Upset?" Linda laughed sharply. She's heartbroken. You're humiliating her. That word again. Humiliating. As if my wedding was a performance staged for my parents' reputation. I didn't make this decision lightly, I said. I just want a peaceful day. Linda lowered her voice. Peace comes from forgiveness, Sofia, not exclusion. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in silence, my heart pounding. Every call followed the same pattern. Different voices. Same script. My cousin Mark texted. Mom says you're being stubborn. You'll regret this. A family friend wrote. Your parents have always loved you. Why punish them? No one asked what had happened between Emily and me. No one asked how long I'd been hurting. They only wanted to know why I wasn't swallowing it anymore. Then Emily called. I let it ring 3 times before answering. So, she said, you're really going through with it? Yes. She laughed, slow and disbelieving. You always did love playing the victim. That one hurt more than I expected. I'm not a victim, I said quietly. I'm just done. Done with what? She snapped. Being part of this family? With being treated like I don't matter, I replied. She went silent for a moment, then said, You know Mom's been crying, right? I felt the familiar pull, the instinct to fix, to apologize, to make myself smaller so everyone else could feel better. Instead, I said, I didn't cause that. You're tearing everyone apart, she said. All because you can't handle one day not being about you. I almost laughed. One day, I repeated. That's all I asked for. One day. She hung up on me. That night, my parents sent an email. Not a text, not a call. An email carefully structured, emotionally distant, impossible to interrupt. They wrote about family unity, about tradition, about sacrifice. They reminded me of birthdays they'd paid for, schools they'd supported, holidays they'd hosted. They framed my decision as cruelty, as immaturity, as betrayal. At the end, my mother wrote, We never thought you would do this to us. Daniel read it slowly, then closed the laptop. They're not talking to you, he said gently. They're talking at you. The pressure didn't stop there. My dad called 2 days later. You know, he said, his voice calm but tight. People are starting to ask questions. I'm sure they are, I replied. This isn't how families handle conflict, he continued. You're forcing us into an impossible position. I swallowed. You already chose a position. There was a long pause. If you go through with this, he said, things won't be the same. For the first time, the threat was clear. I hung up shaking, realizing something important. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing control. And once I understood that, the guilt began to loosen its grip. The wedding was still months away, but the family I thought I had was already gone. What I didn't know yet was that this was only the beginning and that their next move would push everything past the point of quiet suffering. I used to think boundaries were quiet things, polite conversations, calm explanations, mutual respect. I learned the hard way that when people are used to crossing your boundaries, they don't hear them as limits, they hear them as a challenge. The pressure stopped being subtle. My mom called one morning while I was at work. I stepped outside to answer, already bracing myself. We need to talk about the guest list again, she said, her voice tight but controlled. There's nothing new to discuss, I replied. She exhaled sharply. Sofia, do you understand what this is doing to your father? My chest tightened. What do you mean? He's under a lot of stress, she said. This situation is affecting his health. There it was. Fear, disguised as concern. Responsibility placed carefully in my hands. I'm not responsible for that, I said, though my voice shook. You're choosing this, she insisted. You could end it today. I went back to my desk afterward and stared at my computer screen without seeing it. For hours, I replayed her words. His health. You're choosing this. That night, Daniel noticed I was quiet. They're escalating, he said after I told him. That's not an accident. A week later, my dad called. I want to be very clear, he said. If Emily isn't invited, we will not help with the wedding in any way. I laughed once, bitterly. You weren't helping anyway. That's not the point, he replied. We won't attend, and we won't explain why. The threat wasn't about money. It was about reputation, about letting everyone believe I was the problem. Soon after, relatives stopped responding to my messages. Invitations I'd sent out came back with polite declines. Friends of the family avoided asking questions. The story had already been told for me, without me. Then came the final attempt. Emily showed up at my apartment. I froze when I opened the door. She stood there with crossed arms, eyes sharp, a familiar look of authority on her face. "You really enjoy this, don't you?" she said, watching Mom fall apart. I felt something in me finally snap, not in anger, but in exhaustion. "You don't get to speak for her," I said. She stepped closer. "You think you're stronger than us now. You think you've outgrown the family." "I think I've outgrown being treated like an afterthought," I replied. She scoffed. "You need us." "No," I said. "You just need me to believe that." That was the first time I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. After she left, I locked the door and slid down against it, shaking. For years, I'd been trained to doubt myself. Now that I wasn't, everything felt terrifying and freeing at the same time. The next morning, I contacted a counselor. Not because I was weak, but because I wanted support that didn't come with conditions. For the first time, I started documenting everything. Messages, emails, calls. Not to retaliate, but to protect myself. I was done being cornered into silence. The wedding was getting closer. And so was the moment when my parents would realize that the leverage they thought they had over me was already gone. I had hoped the conflict would stay private. I was wrong about that too. 3 weeks before the wedding, my mom insisted on one last family meeting. She framed it like an olive branch, a chance to talk things through like adults. Against my better judgment and with Daniel by my side, I agreed to meet at a neutral place, a small conference room at a community center near my parents' house. Emily was already there when we arrived. She sat beside my parents, arms folded, expression calm and confident. The seating alone told me everything. This wasn't a conversation, it was a presentation. My mom started. "We're here because we love you," she said, looking directly at me. "And because this situation has gone too far." Daniel reached for my hand under the table. "I've explained my reasons," I said. "Nothing has changed." My dad leaned forward. "What's changed," he replied, "is that you've made this public." "I didn't," I said calmly. "You did." Emily rolled her eyes. "Everyone knows now, Sofia. You've made Mom look like a terrible parent." "That's not my responsibility," I said. "I didn't tell anyone what happened between us." She laughed. "You didn't have to. Your silence says enough." The room felt smaller. My mom's voice softened the way it always did when she was about to say something painful. "We're asking you to reconsider," she said. "For the family. For your future. People remember these things." There it was again. The warning wrapped as advice. "I'm not negotiating my wedding," I replied. "Or my boundaries." My dad sighed. "Then you leave us no choice." I straightened. "What choice?" "We won't attend," he said, "and we'll make it clear that it was your decision." Daniel spoke for the first time. "You're punishing her for protecting herself." Emily snapped her head toward him. "This doesn't concern you." "It does," he said calmly. "She's my family now." Something in Emily's expression hardened. "You think you know her," she said to him. "You don't see how manipulative she can be." That was it. I stood up, heart pounding. "You don't get to rewrite my life anymore," I said. "And you don't get to speak for me." My mom's eyes filled with tears. "So that's it? You're choosing him over us?" "No," I said. "I'm choosing myself." I reminded them clearly and calmly that I had the right to decide who attended my wedding. That harassment, pressure, and threats were not acceptable. That any further attempts to intimidate me would go through legal channels if necessary. The word legal changed the air in the room. My dad stiffened. Emily went quiet. My mom looked stunned. "You would really do that?" she whispered. "I hope I don't have to," I replied. "But I will protect myself." We left shortly after. In the car, my hands shook uncontrollably. "That was brave," Daniel said softly. It didn't feel brave. It felt final. Because as we drove away, I understood something deeply. The family I had been fighting to belong to no longer existed. And the one I was building would demand something different: honesty, respect, and the courage to walk away when those things weren't offered. The wedding was still ahead, but the breaking point had already passed. The morning of my wedding was quiet. Not the nervous, chaotic quiet I had imagined as a girl, but something deeper. Still. Intentional. as if the day itself was holding its breath with me. I woke up before the alarm and lay there listening to Daniel's steady breathing, reminding myself that no matter what happened next, I wasn't alone. I had made peace with the fact that my parents might not come. I had told myself I was ready. I wasn't. As my phone buzzed with messages from friends and vendors, I kept glancing at it, half expecting a last-minute apology. A change of heart. Something. Nothing came. At the venue, guests arrived smiling, hugging me, telling me how beautiful everything looked. I smiled back, practiced and careful. Only a few people noticed the empty front row. My Aunt Linda avoided my eyes. My cousin Mark looked uncomfortable. Someone whispered, "Didn't you say her parents were coming?" When the ceremony music began, I felt my chest tighten. This was the moment parents usually stood, smiled, took photos they'd frame forever. My parents' seats stayed empty. Emily wasn't there either. The officiant glanced at me gently, silently asking if I was ready. I nodded. As I walked down the aisle, I expected to feel grief. Instead, I felt clarity. They had made their choice. And for the first time, I didn't chase them for it. During the vows, I barely noticed the room. I focused on Daniel's voice, steady and sure. "I choose you," he said. "Not because it's easy, but because it's honest." I cried then, not from sadness but relief. At the reception, the absence became impossible to ignore. People asked questions carefully, politely, as if the truth might shatter if spoken too loudly. "I heard your parents couldn't make it. I hope everything's okay. They must be so proud." I didn't correct them. I didn't explain. I simply said, "Today is about what we're building." Then something unexpected happened. People started talking. Not about me, but about them. An older relative leaned toward another and said, "I can't believe they skipped their daughter's wedding." A family friend shook her head. "No matter what happened, you show up." We voled in turning. For years, my parents controlled the narrative by staying silent. That day, their silence finally spoke for itself. Later that night, I checked my phone. One message from my mom. "I hope you're happy." I stared at it for a long time before replying. "I am at peace," I wrote. And I meant it. Because while they were absent, something else was present: support, warmth, people who loved me without conditions. As the music played and Daniel pulled me onto the dance floor, I realized something powerful. They hadn't ruined my wedding. They had revealed themselves, and everyone had seen it. In the weeks after the wedding, the noise slowly faded. There were no dramatic apologies. No sudden realizations. No movie-style reconciliation. Just distance. My parents didn't call. Emily didn't reach out. At first, the silence felt heavy, like something unfinished, but over time, it softened into something else: peace. Friends told me things they hadn't said before. "I always thought your parents were intense. Emily has always gotten away with a lot. I didn't realize how unfair things were for you." I listened without responding. I didn't need validation anymore. I already had clarity. A few months later, my mom sent a message asking if we could talk things through. Not an apology, not accountability, just an attempt to return to the old dynamic where feelings were discussed, but behavior never changed. I replied calmly. "I'm open to conversation," I wrote, "but only with respect, boundaries, and a mediator if needed." She never answered, and that told me everything. I continued therapy. I learned the language of boundaries, of emotional safety, of documenting interactions when pressure turned into intimidation, not because I planned to fight my family, but because I refused to be cornered again. Daniel and I built a life that felt steady, honest, free of emotional negotiations. Our home became a place where voices weren't raised to control, where silence wasn't used as punishment. Sometimes people ask if I regret my decision. I don't. Because here's the truth no one tells you. You don't lose family when you set boundaries. You lose illusions. My parents didn't lose a daughter because of one wedding invitation. They lost every child they ignored for years by refusing to change, and I didn't win by cutting them off. I won by choosing myself without cruelty, without revenge, without becoming the villain they needed me to be. If there's one lesson I want to leave you with, it's this. Love without respect is not love. Family without accountability is not safety. And protecting yourself is not betrayal. Sometimes, The bravest thing you can do isn't holding on. It's letting go with clarity, dignity, and peace.